Good evening. Welcome everyone to tonight's program. As you all know, we are here for the Kinder Institute Forum, which we have about twice a year. This is our signature lecture series where we bring thought leaders from around the country and sometimes from even outside of the country to come and talk to us about really important issues. And I think most of you know, but my name is Ruth López Turley, and I'm very, very honored and privileged to be the director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research. And tonight, I'm also very, very grateful for, of course, the Museum of Fine Arts for allowing us to use this beautiful space for this event. So tonight, I'm especially grateful to welcome Adam Gamoran, who is currently the president of the William T. Grant Foundation, which is headquartered in New York City. But he has come tonight to share more about the foundation, but about his broader work in many areas that are near and dear to my heart. So a little bit about the William T. Grant Foundation. It was founded in 1936 with a mission to improve the lives of young people. And before Adam became president of the William T. Grant Foundation, he was a professor of sociology. He was the John D. MacArthur Professor of Sociology and Educational Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And he was also the director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research during his time there. He is a member of the National Academy of Education and was twice appointed by President Obama to serve on the National Board for Education Sciences. From 2014 to 2020, he chaired the Board on Science Education of the National Academies. And throughout his career, Adam has done extensive research focusing on educational policy and school reform and inequalities and many other really important topics, which you'll hear about this evening. So before we get started, I do want to let everyone know and remind people that you will have an opportunity to submit questions. There will be a Q&A after my conversation with Adam, so please jot down any questions that come to mind during the program. You should have received a little piece of paper to jot down your questions as you think of them, and then toward the end of the program, you'll have an opportunity to pass them down, and there will be people walking up and down the aisles, collecting your questions. So be sure to write those down. Also, as you begin to participate in tonight's conversation, if you want to share out on social media, please use hashtag KIForum. That's hashtag KIForum. And I know Adam will probably be doing this as well. Adam's very active on social media. So with that, please join me in welcoming Adam Gamoran. All right, so Adam, I want to start off by giving you an opportunity to say a little bit about yourself that has nothing to do with the stuff that I just shared, basically from your resume, right? So we want to first learn about you, your background, and why you do what you do. But before I do that, I do want to mention to people, just for full transparency, so our relationship actually goes back, I don't know how many years at this point, but back to, when did I graduate from? Thank you. 2000, that would be my husband. Like, why does this person know such a detail, right? In 2002, when I completed my PhD and was looking for a job, and Adam actually hired me. Gave me my very first job after getting my PhD, where I became a professor of sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was chairing the sociology department there at the time. And during my early years as a professor, Adam was my mentor. as new professors got matched up with more senior professors, and I shouldn't use the word was my mentor, because in many ways he still is my mentor. So Adam and I have known each other since then 2002, so it's a little while. Yeah.
You bet. Well, Ruth, let me start by saying what an honor it is to be here. First with you, Ruth. Second, at Rice University, a place that I admire, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And third, as a speaker in the Kinder Institute Forum, which has brought to this community some very august speakers, and so I'm honored to be in this context. You asked me to speak a little bit about how I got into this business of education research and addressing issues of inequality. You know, everyone has a story about education. We've all experienced education. There are a lot of topics that we study in research universities that not everybody has an experience with, but education is a universal. Education is also fundamental to the well-being of society and for social mobility of individuals. And if you come from a family, as I do, that's committed to social justice, trying to understand why some people are more successful in education than others, and how we can help all young people achieve their full potential, becomes a driving question. And so that, I would say, is something that interested me throughout my entire life. Because of the example of my parents and grandparents who are all involved in education at some level or another. But when I went to college, I wasn't planning to go into education. I was planning to be an archaeologist. And I went to the University of Chicago because they have a very fine archaeology program there. And it turned out there were certain aspects of education that I was not proficient at. Drawing, recognizing physical objects from drawing, not very good at that. Really important skills if you're going to be an archaeologist. But they had, at the University of Chicago, a one-year master's program in the social sciences. So I was able to, I didn't want to abandon my undergraduate major because I had almost finished it. But I was able to combine that with this entree into the social sciences. And from that, I was hooked. I knew I wanted to study education. It was only a question of what discipline I would do it in. I hit on sociology. What I like to say is I thought that I was going to have a career where I dug stuff up out of the ground and made up stories about the people who used what I found. So now instead, I give people surveys, and then I make up stories about the answers I get on the surveys. It's not that different.
Yeah, so I can't imagine you as an archaeologist, though, I have to admit. So I'm so glad that you made a change there. Now, Adam, as I mentioned earlier, I got to know you when you were a professor, but then you made a switch to being the president of this foundation, which is a very different job. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you made that switch, and in particular, why you made that switch into this particular foundation? Obviously there's a connection there in terms of your research background and what this foundation focuses on, but I would love for you to share a little bit more about the foundation's focus on supporting research on youth and how that transition went for you.
Sure. So, the William T. Grant Foundation supports research to improve the lives of young people. So it's a foundation with a pretty distinctive niche in that it focuses overwhelmingly on supporting research. So as someone who had been a research leader in the university for many years, it was not a big jump or a rough transition simply to move to the other side of the table. Instead of seeking funds to support my research and that of my colleagues, I now award funds to support research of others. But passing judgments on research, that is something that we are deeply engaged in as professors, whether it's our student work or reviewing journal articles or reviewing grant applications. Nurturing the careers of younger scholars certainly something that I had done as a department chair and as a center director, collaborating, partnerships, bringing people together, creating synergies among other people so they could do their best work, something I had long experience with. So the transition was not an abrupt transition. It was a fairly natural transition for me, having gone through many years of leadership roles at the university to switch to a different leadership role, but in the same kind of genre. Now, to do this at the William T. Grant Foundation, I think is a unique opportunity for me. As a sociologist, it allows me to paint on a broader canvas than when I was doing my own work or leading a research institute within a single university. We also focus on improving young people's lives, so it's not only about education, it's also about any setting where young people are found: criminal justice, juvenile justice, housing, child welfare, neighborhoods, after-school programs, et cetera. So it gives me a deep connection to research in an area that I'm knowledgeable about and passionate about.
Now, so what have you learned over the years? What would you say were the biggest lessons over the years of doing this kind of work? The biggest lessons about funding this kind of work, or perhaps what has surprised you the most now that you're, as you put it, now that you're on the other side of the table?
Yeah. So within our broad mission of supporting research to improve the lives of young people, we have two areas of focus. One is on reducing inequality in youth outcomes, and the other is on improving the way evidence from research is used in policy and practice. With regard to reducing inequality, we have had success in, so first of all, why do we support research on reducing inequality? I think there's a four-part answer to that question. First, inequality in the United States is excessive. And you can see that if you compare us today to our own past history. Mm-hmm. Second, and you can also see it if you compare the United States to other Western democracies.
Can you give us a few concrete examples of why you said we have excessive inequality today?
Yeah, so during the period after the Second World War, economic inequality in the United States contracted. Those in the lower realms of the income distribution had elevated earnings compared to the past and were closer to those in the higher realms. Mm-hmm. Since the 1980s, we've experienced an expansion in inequality, so that the difference between the highest earners and the lowest earners is farther apart than it has been. It's as far apart today as it was in the Roaring 20s, 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So very high levels of inequality there. We also experience dramatic racial and ethnic inequality. In some areas, education among them, we have less inequality today than we did in the past. But when it comes to the labor market payoffs to education, we experience persisting racial inequality. When it comes to college enrollments, we've had a contraction of racial inequality, but when it comes to completion of college, we have continuing racial inequality. We also have dramatic divides between young people who are born in the United States or from parents who are born in the United States to those of immigrant origins. That's another important cleavage of inequality in our society. And these inequalities are persisting and in some areas have even gotten worse in recent decades.
So that's one reason why the foundation focuses on inequality,
Oh yeah, I didn't finish my four reasons. Yes. I only gave you the first reason.
Yes, I interrupted.
That there's a lot of inequality. Yeah. But the second reason is that excessive inequality is harmful. It is socially divisive, and it's a drag on our economic productivity. But the third reason we focus on reducing inequality is because we are not paralyzed in the face of inequality. In fact, the inequality that we experience today is there because we built it into our system. And we can change the system. There are steps we can take to reduce inequality. Now, when I speak to researchers, they always agree with my fourth point, which is that if inequality is excessive inequality is harmful, and there are things we can do to reduce inequality. The fourth point is we need research to identify those programs, practices, and policies that will, in fact, reduce inequality.
And is your sense that people really want to reduce inequality today? I mean, because sometimes I wonder about this, because you set off, you're on this mission to reduce inequality, at least by funding research that aims to reduce inequality. And which is I should pause and say that's really something that we should recognize, because there are a lot of research that has been done on identifying the inequalities, but not really focusing on reducing inequality. I know that's something that this foundation has really stressed, so I want to applaud that. But at the same time, do you think there is an appetite for actually reducing inequality?
There is a certain level at which this is near universal. And that is, everybody can get behind opportunity. Everybody, and when I say everybody, it's not literally everybody, but almost everybody, very wide range. Wherever one falls on the political spectrum, for example, people get behind the idea that everyone should have an equal opportunity for success. And if somebody is born into circumstances that give them disadvantages, whether by virtue of their family income, or by virtue of the neighborhood they grew up, or by virtue of prejudice against people with the color of the skin that they bear. Everybody in America believes that we should have equal opportunity. Now, the William T. Grant Foundation would go one step further, and that is that it is not just about providing the same opportunities, but rather about compensating for inequality at the starting point so that we reduce inequality of outcomes. Now, that is not universal. And the reason that is not universal is because some inequality is almost certainly necessary, because inequality is a motivator. Trying to achieve success through competition is part of our system and part of what's behind the success of our system. So not everybody accepts the idea that we should have less inequality than we do, whereas almost everybody gets behind the idea of equal opportunity. But my response to that is, it's true. We probably need some inequality. The William T. Grant Foundation's idea is not that we can eliminate inequality in the sense of a distribution of some valued good like education or income, that everybody should have the same. That's not what we're working for. We do think that group differences by race, by gender, by disability status, by immigrant origins, those can be eliminated. But inequality in the sense of a distribution of outcomes cannot be eliminated. But we know we can have less inequality than we do today, because we used to have less inequality in this country, and we had a perfectly productive economy, and we had more social cohesion. So we don't need as much inequality as we do today. And so that's my response to those who recognize the value of equal opportunity but are unwilling to set as a goal the reduction of unequal outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that I really want to spend time talking to you about is, as you know, we're not really going to be able to make any headway in reducing these inequalities or improving equal opportunity, however you want to phrase it, unless we are able to put into use the research and the things that we're learning through research. Unless we can actually put it to use, we're not going to make significant headway in actually reducing it. So I know that the foundation has really done a lot to focus on research use, and that's something we share in common. The Kinder Institute focuses heavily on making sure that the research that we're producing is actually getting used and actually having an impact. If it's not getting used, that would be a huge disappointment for us. We don't want our research to just sit in a journal or sit in a report somewhere. We want it to be used and have an impact. Can you tell us more about what the foundation, the William T. Grant Foundation, is doing in that regard?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Ruth. That is certainly an interest that we share in common. You know, our goal is to improve the lives of young people, but our mechanism is supporting research. So if we support research and it gets written up in academic journals and sits on the shelves of libraries, it's not doing very much to improve the lives of young people. So how do we make that connection? How do we go from supporting research to improving young people's lives? And the answer is the research has to get used. It has to be consequential for decision makers. It has to change our understanding of our social lives so we can think more deeply about ways to address our problems. So for the last 15 years or so, the William T. Grant Foundation has supported a portfolio of work on improving the way evidence from research is used in policy and practice. And what we've learned from that body of evidence is that the use of research evidence is not dependent on the quality of evidence. In fact, we have many examples of bad evidence being used and good evidence being ignored.
Okay.
So some in the research world have the idea that all we need to do to get evidence used is to produce good evidence. And our job as researchers is to figure things out, write it up, throw it over the wall, and there's somebody waiting on the other side of the wall to catch it and run with it. There's nobody waiting on the other side of the wall. So it turns out that more important than the quality of the research are the quality of relationships between producers and consumers of research and the intermediary actors who often bring producers and consumers together. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of ways to craft those relationships because relationships don't exist in the abstract. They require a structure to create a context in which those relationships can exist. And one of the leading approaches to building relationships between evidence producers and consumers is the research practice partnership, which is, I know, central to the work of the Kinder Institute and which you yourself, Ruth, are a pioneer, having created the Houston Education Research Consortium before. So in a partnership, as you yourself have written, there's an opportunity for researchers to deeply understand the challenges that the practitioner is facing, and therefore to ask questions whose answers matter to decision makers. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out if you're asking questions that matter to your partners, there's a greater opportunity for the evidence from the research to be used in policies. Mm-hmm. So we at the foundation have made investments in supporting research carried out in partnerships. I'm proud that one of those awards recently went to the Kinder Institute and the Houston Education Research Consortium to study the value of having researchers embedded within school districts for improving the use of evidence. We also helped lead the creation of the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships, which you yourself, in partnership with you, Ruth. So we're very proud of that work as well. And we also have something that we call our Institutional Challenge Grant, which challenges universities to build a partnership with a nonprofit or a government agency to jointly develop and execute a research agenda on reducing inequality in youth outcomes, to build the capacity of the nonprofit or government agency to use evidence in decision-making, and to reshape the incentive structure within the university to value and encourage partnership-oriented, engaged scholarship. In creating this, one of the examples I had in mind was Rice University, because I'm familiar with the support that this university has given through the Kinder Institute and through other mechanisms to encourage faculty to pursue research that responds to social needs, that provides public impact. You know, this is common in biomedical sciences and engineering. Tech transfer is always valued. Did you create a patent? That's a sign of success in engineering. But in the social sciences, where we work, such applied contributions are often met with disdain.
Yep.
And it is time for this to change. And so we're trying to lead the way to get universities to support research that is useful and gets used for public impact.
So I love those comments, but now I need to ask you, though, a question that I am honestly struggling with quite frequently about research use. So these were, the previous questions were softball questions. Here come the harder questions. These are genuine questions that I'm struggling with. And that is that often people want to use research that aligns with their prior beliefs. Yes. They want to use research that supports what they already believe to be the truth. And so if the research happens to align with their prior beliefs, oh, absolutely, I'm going to use this. I'm going to cite it all over the place. But if they come across research that challenges their prior beliefs, they want to ignore it or scrutinize it, right? And say, this is not valid, this is not high-quality research, or whatever. Now, to be fair, because I know policymakers do this a lot of leaders do this, and frankly, I think we all do this, including researchers that should know better. I'll admit to my own, the way that I've caught myself doing something like this is that when I evaluate or assess research, if the research aligns with my beliefs, I'm more likely to accept it. But if it challenges my beliefs, I'm going to scrutinize it. Right? So this is a manner in which I did, and I'm trying to catch myself and trying to be better about this. But I think that honestly, many of us, especially just out in the general public, we do this. What have you learned for how to address this? Because that's a huge challenge in research use, that sure we'll use it, but only in this way.
Yeah. So this is a great question. It's not a new question. It's a long-standing question. And I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer, so we refer to this as the strategic use of research evidence. I'm going to use the research evidence that fits the approach that I already want to take. So the first answer is that I have newfound respect for the strategic use of research evidence.
Tell me more.
when I went into this work, my thinking was instrumental use evidence to make decisions, good. Conceptual use research to understand our problems more deeply, good. Strategic use, bad. That's the attitude I went in with because of my own experience in research, where people didn't want to know what I had found. They only wanted to know what part that I had found was consistent with what they already wanted to do. But it turns out that there are advocates who are promoting approaches to solving problems that need evidence that can shore up their advocacy. For example, First Focus on Children is an advocacy organization in Washington, D.C. that advocates for pro-children policies. When we supported a National Academies report on a roadmap to ending child poverty, they were able to take those findings and mobilize a consensus that ultimately led, they weren't the only actor, but ultimately led to an expanded child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan, which in 1 year, and only for 1 year since it ended, cut child poverty in the United States in half.
That's huge.
So that's a strategic use of research evidence. It was authentic. They used the research appropriately. They didn't disregard contradictory evidence, but it was a strategic use of evidence that was very valuable. So for this reason, I say that I have newfound respect for the value of strategic use of research evidence. But
there's good. I'm glad there's a but. 'Cause I was going to bring it up.
we also experience the phenomenon that you described, where a policymaker or practitioner will only take the part of the evidence that is consistent with their priors and ignore the rest of it. And we've seen this on both sides of the political spectrum. I always give the example of Upward Bound, which is a high school to college transition program favored on the left. And there was a randomized trial that showed Upward Bound had no effects. And the next thing that happened, Congress passed a law, no more randomized trials of Upward Bound.
Oh.
Meanwhile, there was research on private school vouchers, and the vouchers turned out had negative effects. Next thing that happened, money for studies of vouchers eliminated by the U.S. Congress. So this is not confined to one political orientation. So there are ways of addressing this, but it's not a simple or fast approach. And the way is through relationships. I've commented before that partnerships are the antidote to polarization. If we can build a partnership, so we're not just dropping in from on high, dropping some evidence down, but building relationships of trust with potential actors, there's a greater chance that the evidence will be used in an authentic way. An example that we supported was something called the Research to Policy Collaboration, created by a researcher named Max Crowley at Penn State University, where he has a system to build a structured relationship between researcher and congressional staff. And he did a study of this approach where both congressional staff and researchers were randomized. In the treatment, they got this structured relationship. The congressional staff in the control group got a brochure. The researchers in the control group got nothing. And the study showed, this randomized study showed, that the congressional staff in the treatment group were more likely to use evidence in deliberations and in legislation itself than those in the control group. And the researchers in the treatment group had greater familiarity with and comfort with interacting with policymakers, and this was especially true for researchers of color who are often have a harder time finding their way into social networks that bring them into contact with policymakers. So by building this kind of trust between the researcher and the policymaker, the research to policy collaboration was able to bring in a more authentic use of research evidence into the policy process. So it's not a simple answer or a fast answer, but we're not. But it's not like there's nothing we can do about it either.
Right, I agree. And so essentially what you're saying is if we want to at least have a chance at getting research used, especially in these tougher situations where it challenges prior beliefs through partnerships, we can do that. And that makes sense, that if you actually have a relationship of trust with the person bringing this information to you that is challenging you, you're actually going to give it serious consideration because of that relationship.
Yeah, at least there's a better chance of it.
Right. No guarantee at any point. And I'm assuming, by the way, in this example that you just mentioned for this randomized study, I assume Texas legislators were not involved?
I don't know.
In that study?
The identities were not revealed.
Yeah, okay. because I think we need to think about some of that here in our own state in making. And I say it to be funny, but honestly, I'm also being very serious and to be fair to our legislators who work really hard under really challenging circumstances. I, as a researcher, want to do everything I can to make sure that I am doing a good job of bringing the information to them and doing it in the right way, so to increase the chances that it's used. But yeah, there's a lot of work still to be done in this area. I also wanted to come back to something you mentioned briefly earlier, and that's about the role of universities and what universities can do to support and facilitate this kind of research, which, as I guess we both know, it's not often the case. And it's something that is a big concern to me, because when it comes to, like, maybe I'm a little biased here, but when it comes to the best research out there, right, cutting edge research, all the innovations in research, often they come from, of course, research universities, like Rice University, what we call R1 institutions. These are the institutions that bring in the most research dollars, and Rice is among them. It's probably actually one of the smallest R1 universities in the country. It may be the smallest, but somebody needs to verify that, but it's among the smallest. So we have all this great research happening on our campuses, and yet, in general, we don't do a very good job of ensuring that our research is actually being used and actually having an impact. And obviously, that's what we're focusing on here, to try to do a better job of that. But you're traveling all over the country, especially representing this foundation that is supporting this kind of work and trying to bring about change at these institutions. Yep. What are you learning through that work? What is some of the change that has been happening? And of course, what is some of the change that is still needed?
Yeah. You know, Ruth, universities today are beset with challenges from many directions. They're accused of having a political bias. They're accused of wasting money. They're accused of not having value for education. They're accused of not protecting their students. Accusations from across the spectrum leveled at our universities. And if universities could do more to serve the public good, they would be able to demonstrate their value more effectively. So I think this idea of making universities places where public impact research features more centrally, I think is in the interest of every university, whether it's an urban private university like Rice, which benefits from demonstrating its value to the community in which it's embedded, or it's a public university like the University of Wisconsin, which benefits from showing its value to the state. So this kind of public impact support is very important for universities, and we are part of an effort to get universities to seize that moment. There are many things universities can do, but the first is they have to recognize the value of partnership-oriented, engaged scholarship. Typically, you know, when I go around the country and I speak with chancellors, presidents, provosts, even deans, they all love this idea because they want to see their university supported. But when I get down to the departments and the individual faculty, and again, I'm talking specifically about the social sciences, which is our RA, they're not so sure, because social science departments derive their esteem from their disciplines. You know, the prestige of a sociology department depends on how it's regarded within the American Sociological Association, not how it's regarded within a university or in a community. Right. And so the rewards for individual faculty members are for publishing articles for answering questions that are generated by disciplinary knowledge, and for publishing articles in the most prestigious journals. So that, you know, there's a value of that. Right. You know, basic research is important, But that's not public impact research, and that doesn't help solidify the value of the university in its community. So university leadership is needed to expand our understanding of what value, what counts as value within a university. And many of the universities we're working with are taking steps in that direction. Some, for example, University of California, Berkeley, have actually revised or expanded their tenure and promotion standards to develop specific criteria for community-engaged scholarship. Because you need criteria. You can't just say, well, we value community engagement. How do you know, and what counts as quality? So universities like UC Berkeley are actually developing criteria for identifying quality of contributions within engaged scholarship. You know, how do we decide if someone merits tenure? We look at their productivity, and we solicit testimonials from other researchers. Oh, this research influenced my research, pioneering the field. Well, why couldn't we count up how often an individual's research figures in the news media or in legislative deliberations? Why couldn't we solicit testimonials from policymakers or practitioners? Why should research only count if it influences other research and not if it influences the public good? I say it should.
Right.
And so tenure and promotion is really important. It's kind of the big headline, but it's far from the only way. It is not the only thing universities can do to recognize and reward engaged scholarship. Some universities are developing centers or institutes. Perhaps the Kinder Institute plays this role, where there is resources and space for faculty members to develop partnerships. Some universities are providing seed funding or summer salary or course releases for pursuing engaged scholarship. Some universities are giving awards, community engaged research awards, to recognize and showcase engaged scholarship. Some universities are creating external staff positions to help faculty with developing external partnerships. Some universities are turning their grant-getting infrastructure towards programs such as ours that provide external support for engaged scholarship. So there are a number of things that universities can do. As I said when we started our conversation, Ruth, Rice University has been a leader in many ways, not just in its strategic mission, which includes engagement with Houston. Almost every university has rhetoric to that effect, but in actually doing this in tangible ways. And so I think you're a bit ahead of the curve in that here. But what we've discovered by our institutional challenge grant, the many applicants, the three or four other funders who have joined us in supporting it, is we are actually riding the crest of a wave. We are not trying to move a mountain in creating this change. We are riding the crest of a wave that is already rushing forward.
I would add that as long as we continue to evaluate research in the way and researchers in the way that we do in many universities, essentially we are producing research by the elite for the elite, which I think is a valid criticism of many universities. Would you say that currently, I know that it's a movement, we've made progress, or more universities are starting to take this seriously, that beyond rhetoric, but would you say that we're still in the minority nationwide?
Yes. No, we certainly have a long way to go. The Carnegie Foundation has of course, their famous rating scheme. That's where the R1 designation comes from. But also, they have a separate scale for community engaged research, and only a tiny fraction of the universities designated as community engaged are Research 1 universities. That is, universities that receive more than $100 million, or that expend more than $100 annually, $100 million annually in for research.
Right.
So only a tiny fraction are the research-intensive universities. So we do have a long way to go to see our universities with the highest research capacity turning some of that capacity in the social sciences to social impact research.
And therein lies the great irony, right? That these are the research universities that actually use the most research dollars, and I would just want to point out to the audience that a lot of these research dollars are taxpayer dollars. Some of this research funding comes from federal agencies like NIH and NSF, National Science Foundation, and so on. So I think that, from my perspective anyway, if we're going to use precious taxpayer dollars to do this kind of work, we better make sure that it's actually benefiting the community and not just benefiting our careers. So we have a very long way to go, but I applaud the foundation for taking a stab at it and helping our institutions get on board with this change. It's actually quite a radical change if you think about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Ruth. I appreciate your comments, and I would say, it's not that we have to eliminate basic research. We just have to expand our understanding of what research is valued so that more of the research we do solves problems in local communities,
Right.
and is not always directed only towards addressing puzzles coming out of some social science discipline.
Now, here's another challenge or an issue that I struggle with personally, and you've probably noticed I've gone off script quite a bit tonight. I hope you don't mind that I'm continuing that route, because I'm just sharing out the things that I'm struggling with, right? These are genuine questions. How do you think about the tension, the inherent tension between using resources, money, to support research versus using these resources to provide direct services for people in need? How do you think about that tension?
Yep, I've got a very clear answer to that.
Good.
Which is that research has a role to play in solving our problems. If we knew what to do, then we wouldn't need research. We wouldn't need to ask any questions. We could just do it. The problem is we don't know what to do. And you can see that we don't know what to do in my area because inequality is expanding and inequality is persisting. So clearly we don't know what we need to do. And some people might say, oh, we know what we need to do, we just don't have the will to do it. That is not correct. There are many things that have been tried and have been unsuccessful. Direct services are valuable, but the problem is we don't know what the most effective direct services are. We don't know how to spend our money in the most efficient ways on direct services. We don't know how to get the most value out of the public dollars or private philanthropic dollars that we're investing. And that's where research fits into the picture. Sometimes I speak with undergraduates about a research career. And the undergraduates are often very motivated by social ideals. They want to improve the world. They want to help the downtrodden. And I say, research is one avenue for doing this. It's not the only avenue, but it is an avenue. That research will answer questions that will lead us towards implementing more effective approaches. So, sure, we could spend all our dollars on youth services, but we don't know if those youth services would be effective. And so one piece of the puzzle, one part of the ecosystem is research to answer questions about how to implement effective programs, policies, and practices to improve youth outcomes.
Great. As you can tell, I agree with a lot of what you said, but it's something that I think of. Actually, I'd say we need both, right? We need to invest in providing direct services, especially in those areas where we have already done research and we have evidence for why this is the best approach. But of course, even then, it has to be revisited because things change all the time. But we also need to invest in research that helps to inform those direct services, it helps to inform those efforts. And I would say, though, often that's the more challenging type of funding or type of investment to get because it's risky. We don't necessarily know what we'll learn or whether we'll be able to learn what we were hoping to learn. And the rewards are usually more long-term. We first have to do the research, learn from that research, then apply it, and it's more long-term.
That's true, but life is long-term. You know, we should not be under any illusions that we're going to solve the problems of society tomorrow.
That's right.
We have to be in this for the long term. You know, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, as Dr. King and others have told us. But it's not going to bend toward justice on its own. We have to reach up and grab it with both arms and pull as hard as we can if we want that moral arc to bend toward justice, but it is long.
Yeah. Well, those are great comments. So on that note, I have one more question to ask you before we turn to the audience questions. So I want to remind everyone, if you haven't already jotted down a question, please do so right now. And we'll have some folks, part of the Kinder Institute staff, go up and down collecting these questions, or you already have them, or raise your hand and someone will come by and collect your question. So while they do that, thank you. Sam, did you see the person down front? There's somebody down front and a few folks over here too. Thank you. So while they collect those questions, I also wanted to ask you a question about, what advice or suggestions you have for us here in Houston. And you've been to Houston several times now, and you have a sense of what's going on here, what we're trying to do, and some of the challenges that we are facing in Houston and in the state that we're in. And I have to say, that's why I love being here. Sometimes I get questioned, like, why are you in Texas with all the political challenges and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I love Texas, and I love being here because this is where it's at in terms of and people want to do this kind of work to inform the many, many efforts that are happening here. But of course, we have huge challenges. But I just wonder if you have, based on what you know about us, about Houston in this time, in this moment in time, do you have any suggestions for us based on your experience and the things that you've learned?
Well, there's no question that it's a challenging time to be a social science researcher in Texas. No question about that. And this is a big concern to the William T. Grant Foundation because we support research on reducing inequality. That includes racial inequality. And after the racial reckoning that occurred in the aftermath of the tragic killing of George Floyd, since then there's been a backlash that has called into question many of the steps that our institutions have taken to try to redress the persisting racial inequalities in society. So, and we at the foundation are supporting research on those efforts. Research on ethnic studies curricula, research on mitigating teachers' implicit bias, research on building up young people's racial and ethnic identities, research on the practicality and feasibility of reparations for descendants of enslaved persons. So how can we pursue these research projects in such a polarized time? And so I'm sure this is, something that social scientists here are grappling with. And so the advice that I have is goes back to something I spoke about earlier, which is relationships. To build relationships with the participants in your study, to truly embrace community engagement so that the questions you're asking are ones that are coming out of the community, to pursue that research and interpret your findings with community participants. I think it's much harder to harshly judge a research study that the community is fully behind than one that seems to be imposed from an ivory tower university. So I don't think I'm saying anything that you're not already trying to lead here at the Kinder Institute, Ruth. I think that the approach to engage in partnerships across many realms, not just education, but across child welfare systems, across juvenile justice, across housing authorities, building these kinds of partnerships. And speaking of housing, I do want to give a shout out to Professor Anna Rhodes, who also recently got a William T. Grant Foundation grant to pursue research on housing and school decisions. So all of these, looking at focused in partnerships. So all of these partnerships, I think, are one important step towards navigating the challenges that we face today.
All right. Okay, so I have a few questions. And some of y'all write really small, I have to say.
Well, you only gave them a card. If you had given them a poster, they could have written bigger.
Okay, here's one. In your experience, what level of intervention is most open to evidence from policy research? And in parentheses, they put like county level, state level, school district level. Where do you find the most resistance? So where do you find most openness versus more
so
resistance?
it's difficult to generalize because it varies from context to context. But if I were forced to generalize, I would say the most resistance is at the federal level and the least resistance is at the local level, whether it's county or local. So, during the Obama administration, the grantees that we supported were producing results that were well aligned with the direction of federal policy because of President Obama himself declared that inequality is the defining challenge of our time. So if we were supporting researchers exploring responses to inequality, that was obviously going to go over well at the federal level. When the administration changed in 2016, that became less true. But there was still a great need at the state and a great interest at the state and local levels. And we found substantial interest. For example, right around that time was founded something called the Community Foundation Opportunities Network, which still exists today. It's a collaboration among more than 50 local communities around the country dedicated to promoting equal opportunity for young people from varied backgrounds. And so I would say, given my comments earlier about the value of relationships for ensuring that research evidence gets used, it's much more feasible to establish relations the more local the policy policy actors are. So it's difficult to generalize because it varies from context to context, but if I had to generalize, I would say more resistance at the federal level, more openness to research-informed ideas at the local levels.
And are there drawbacks to research-based approaches?
Well, I don't think there's ever a drawback to being more informed as opposed to less informed. But of course, research doesn't always work. First of all, about 80% of interventions that are studied fail. And that's true in the medical sciences as well. That's not just a social science phenomenon.
And what do you mean by fail?
Meaning the hypothesis is not confirmed. The intervention does not achieve the results that people intended.
But I would kind of rephrase that to not say the study failed.
Right, the operation was a success. The patient died, but the operation was a success. Yes.
But that sounds horrible. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
What I meant was, like, if we learned that something didn't work, that's just as useful to know as something did work.
I accept your point.
Sorry.
Yes.
That was the point I was trying to make.
But but the question is about the downside of research.
Right.
So a lot of what we study is not successful. And then it's often the case that what's implemented in one place doesn't work the same way in another place. And so we could try an intervention, find out it's successful, implement it somewhere else, and not achieve the same success. So that's another issue. And then new policies can have unintended consequences. So something we do to try to benefit on one side could cause harm on another side. So those could be some potential downsides about research. And we try to think through those ideas and try to overcome those challenges. Research is not a panacea. It doesn't solve all problems. But I would still maintain, as I said at the beginning, better to be more informed as opposed to less informed.
Right. All right. So this question is, well, first they make a statement that youth inequality is excessive in the United States. I would agree with the person that made this statement. Do you believe that our gerontocracy, here's a new word for me. I don't know if maybe you all know this word. I don't hear this very much. Gerontocracy, and then they define it for us, thank you. With power consolidated in the hands of the older population. And if I may add, often it's the older white population. So let me go back to, because I've lost track of the question. Do you believe that our gerontocracy has an impact on youth inequality? So in other words, since so many decisions are made by the older population, and you all know, for example, that they vote at much higher rates, those kinds of things.
I will assert that the fact that we have a gerontocracy, so I don't dispute that point, is not the reason that we witness youth inequality or that youth inequality has expanded in recent generations. The reason I say this is that there are many older people, one of them sitting in the White House, that have worked as hard as possible to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. In 2021, we had the American Rescue Plan, which expanded the child tax credit, cut child poverty in half in 1 year. That's a tremendous accomplishment imposed by the gerontocracy. We have leaders all over the country who are old and yet are fighting for the rights of children and for efforts to reduce inequality. And we have research that has pointed the way towards those initiatives that will reduce inequality. And as I said before, everybody across the political spectrum can get behind the idea of advancing opportunity. And so so older people can support that as well. There's a technical sense in which the answer to the question is the gerontocracy exacerbates inequality. And that is, when it comes to supporting education, families used to have more children and more couples. There are more couples today who are not having children at all. So the composition of our adult society has changed, and their interests in education has shifted somewhat. And that has had a challenging effect on funding available for our education system. So there's a technical sense in which the premise of the question is correct. But broadly speaking, I don't think it's any kind of necessary or imposed sense in which the fact that older people hold the reins of power means that youth inequality has to expand.
Okay. So last question. Sorry, I have to put my glasses back on. Considering issues that impact privileged communities versus underprivileged communities, why is it that economically disadvantaged communities never receive the benefits of proven interventions? And then they gave some specific examples, but I just want to get at this larger question, or why is it that it seems like often the main people that need to benefit from this research knowledge, this information, it seems like they often do not.
Yeah, so this is a significant problem because those with power and privilege are always fighting to maintain their power and privilege. I'll give you an example of this. Small class sizes are beneficial for children in kindergarten and first grade. It's been demonstrated in some powerful studies. So the state of Wisconsin learned about this. They created a program to implement smaller class sizes in in schools with high concentration of low-income children. Well, it didn't take very long before everybody in the state of Wisconsin wanted the small class size in kindergarten and first grade. So they expanded it to all school systems. Then it was too expensive, and that was the end of it. No one had it. So what could have been an important contribution to reducing inequality, first was in position to exacerbate inequality because it was given to everybody, and then it did nothing for anybody because it was eliminated, because it was too expensive. So something that could have been targeted effectively to underprivileged communities, to use the questioner's terms, was not. So the question was phrased as why? Why? Because people with power and privilege want to maintain their power and privilege.
Absolutely.
That's the simple thing. The more complicated thing is what can we do about it? So there are things that we can do about it. First of all is mobilization. We need to mobilize. But that's not the job of the William T. Grant Foundation. The job of the William T. Grant Foundation is to furnish the knowledge. So I'm telling the questioner, the answer is political mobilization, but that's not a role that the William T. Grant Foundation plays. Mm-hmm. Our role is to support the generation of knowledge that can lead to those effective interventions being deployed where they're most needed. And I'll say one last thing about this, that several years after we implemented our Reducing Inequality portfolio, we took stock of what we had learned. And we found that, in fact, we had supported a number of studies, perhaps a higher percentage than typical, that actually identified programs and practices that effectively reduce inequality and youth outcomes for the young people who are targeted by those programs. Mm-hmm. But we realized that we were not going to achieve our ultimate goal of actually reducing inequality in American society until we could address the structures of inequality and systems of racism and discrimination that created those inequalities in the first place. And so a social movement is one strategy toward broader social change that could overturn the structural foundations of inequality. And there is a role for research in this too. We need research to identify initiatives that can help overturn the structural foundations of inequality, in addition to identifying those interventions that need to be targeted to communities where they're greatest need.
Well, thank you, Adam. Before I let you go, I do want to make a couple of quick announcements. The Kinder Institute's annual luncheon is coming up on May 20th. That's a Monday. I highly, highly encourage all of you to attend, where I'll be sharing out the results of the 43rd Kinder Houston Area Survey, the longest running survey of its kind. And so I would highly encourage you all to attend that, to hear about the results. And I'm going to let you all know, I've already seen a preview of the results, some very interesting findings for this year's survey. And we'll also be hearing a few remarks from our Mayor Whitmire, and we'll be honoring Dr. Mark Boom, President and CEO of Houston Methodist, for all of his great efforts, especially when we were at the peak of the pandemic. So a lot happening at the Kinder Institute's annual luncheon on May 20th, so I encourage all of you all to attend. But with that, please join me in thanking Adam Gamoran, President of the William T. Grant Foundation,